Okay. The next question will be asked by Rebecca.
Do you support question 3, the reduction of the sales and use tax? Do you support any other forms of our state tax system? For example, question 1 on the alcohol tax.
Mr. Wall.
Just let me start out by saying at the beginning that there's nobody more fiscally responsible than I am, having run a private business through 3 recessions and run an airline post 9/11. So the first thing we need to make sure is that every dollar we bring in, we're spending as responsibly as we possibly can. Let me just start off by saying that. It's all about fiscal responsibility. That having been said, we had a $4 billion shortfall in the state budget 2 years ago. We have a $2 billion shortfall coming up. And this is not the time to be cutting taxes. Now, the 2 taxes that you referred to, first of all, if we cut the sales tax back to 3%, that would create an additional $2.5 billion shortfall, which would impact the towns, it would impact our ability to provide great education services, and even to the level of public safety. So I think it would be irresponsible to support rolling the sales tax back to 3%. As far as the alcohol tax is concerned, 100% of the money that's brought in through the alcohol tax goes to prevention and treatment of problems that are created by alcohol. So I think if we cut that tax out, we have to find money to come up with to treat those problems that are associated with substance abuse. So I don't support that rollback either.
Mr. Crocker.
Again, we need to make sure we're clear on the differences between us. The reason I believe we're facing the magnitude of a cut that's proposed on question 3 is because we failed to address the belt-tightening issues before we addressed an increase. So when they were at 5%, the minority party brought as much as $2 billion in possible belt-tightening issues to the table. But we're outmaneuvered, and a bump of the tax to 1.25 or 6.25 was brought about for a vote first before they went to tighten their belt. As soon as they got the money, there was no belt tightening. And this is a reaction to how the taxpayers feel at this time about how much they can give and whether or not they're comfortable to allow Beacon Hill to continue. So some of this is very tough medicine. There's just no question about it, but we can't send the wrong signals either to Beacon Hill and suggest that tax it as will and don't worry about the belt tightening. The thing that you have to remember about the sales tax itself, 3% is the number because they've already levied that much long-term debt against it. So this is just to get us to the long-term debt. For that reason, I also am in favor of the sunset or the exclusion of the liquor tax. There's already a tax on the manufacturing of alcohol, but they will put some long-term debt against it if we don't dispose of it or give it a sunset. Thank you.
Garrett will ask the next question.
Do you support the current laws relative to gay marriage in the state, or should they be reformed in some way?
Mr. Crocker.
I have no social agenda to change any law in this regard at this time. There's just nothing in me that feels that that's an issue of the day. I think the law is truly being tested in all applications of the law and the don't tell, don't ask issue for the military. And what we're finding is that the courts have one opinion and that the legislature leaves us with another. When you tell the individuals, if you go out and collect 10,000 signatures, we'll put it on the ballot, and then you don't, that's just like the tax cuts. That's another reason they'll rebel against you. And that's really what happened here. People went out, collected signatures, wanted it on the ballot, and it was resolved without that measure. In California, we saw it resolved, and then we see a judge stepping in saying we have to protect the minority class. So really what we need is better legislation that says, should a ballot question come forward, it doesn't need to be checked by the Attorney General before we actually expend the taxpayer money to make it a ballot issue. And that's how we'd resolve that. But I have no social agenda to change this. Thank you.
Mr. Wall.
I think that without regard to gender, people who are in love with each other and want to make the commitment of marriage should have the right to do that. I think it's really unfortunate that only 5 states in the United States right now offer that ability for people. And I think not only would I work hard to preserve that right in Massachusetts, but I'd like to actually be a model for the rest of the country and get this done. It's long overdue.
The next question will be asked by Ryan.
Do you support question 2, the removal of the law that streamlines the permit process for developments that include affordable housing? Why or why not?
Starting with Mr. Wall.
There's some great housing advocacy groups on Cape Cod. Housing Assistance Corporation is probably the largest. I served on their board for 6 years, and I really understand a lot of the housing issues on the Cape, which are really being dealt with on a town-by-town basis with some good regional goals. There are about 12,000 40B projects that are currently pending across the Commonwealth. I think it would be really unfortunate to pull the rug out from under those. 40B has added not only a lot of good affordable housing on Cape Cod, but it's also caused the creation of a lot of market rate housing as well. So I absolutely would vote no on question 2 so that we can continue to use 40B in the way that it's been used very successfully. I do think there are some changes we need to look at, and I think on Beacon Hill we'll be having some very good discussions about how to make 40B apply better here on Cape Cod. And I think we do need to look at tweaking the bill, but I certainly would not be in favor of removing it.
Mr. Crocker?
Yes, my family, through my efforts, put forward a lot that became a habitat lot. I personally am giving an asset that became a restricted house for the Housing Authority and for the Housing Enabling Act. And in Barnstable, we've been involved in quite a bit of housing, and I voted for all of it. Chapter 40B is a difficult issue for me, though, and I will not support it disappearing, but you must understand what the real issue is here. It's something that needs to be tweaked. So some thought is if we take it off the rolls, the advocates will get a better law. So that's what some are going to tell you. And that is quite possibly what will happen. The advocates for affordable housing will be there every day, every night, I'm sure of that, and I'll be one of them. But I do think we need some work on the law, and I will not support it being removed.
Okay, Tyler will have the next question.
Should the state take action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? If so, how? And do you support the Cape Wind project?
Mr. Crocker.
Well, certainly, the greenhouse gas emission is more of a science issue for me than I'm really probably versed in. But certainly the Cape Wind issue, I've had a number of votes that I really want to disclose to you at this point. As the Vice President of Barnstable Town Council, I voted against and I voted for funding to stop the Cape Wind project. So I have a record of that, but I also must tell you that I voted for land-based wind turbines, and I brought 2 to my town. So I have a record of being clear on this particular issue, but I'm also equally as clear that I don't believe that siting in Nantucket Sound is the correct place for this.
Mr. Wolf.
I think that as I said before, we're heavily invested in renewable energy, our company is, and I personally believe very strongly that we should have a 20-year plan to make our region self-sufficient from an energy standpoint. And I think we're not going to get that done unless we have a vision and unless we really work hard to achieve that vision. As far as Cape Wind is concerned, environmentally, while I was serving on the board of the Association to Preserve Cape Cod, an exhaustive environmental review process was taken on. And I'm satisfied from an environmental standpoint that the Nantucket Sound would not have adverse impacts from that project. However, I think we need better transparency in the business model. That is, I think if somebody's going to develop Nantucket Sound, we all need to understand what that business is and what it looks like. We also need to all understand what the public benefit is. So I have a lot of trouble now supporting that with an unqualified yes, unless the business plan is there for us all to see, and unless we really understand what the benefit is. There has not been enough public disclosure yet on that project, and I certainly advocate for more public and openness in that project.
Rebecca will ask the next question.
Would you support any reforms of our state legislature? For example, to reduce the power of the legislative leadership?
Mr. Wolf.
The answer is yes, and I think that if it's a democracy, we have to be careful that the power does not concentrate in the hands of too few people. So I think we should be continually looking at the structure in the State House, making sure that there's a full vetting of the process there so that you as voters and voters in a few years, or a couple of years, will really be able to have your voice heard over the special interests and the concentration of power in the hands of a few. So I think that there ought to be an ongoing process, actually, to look at the power and the role of leadership up at the State House.
Mr. Crocker.
I'm troubled by the one-party rule, so the way to change it would be to put people like me in the seats that I'm running for. What you're really looking at is a situation where Governor Patrick brought forward 38 line item vetoes over the last 2 years. 38 places he thought they should cut the budget. When it came back to the Senate to put the package together originally, they were all denied. Not one of them was supported by his own party, who has the rule. Something's seriously earmarked here. Something's very wrong. And when you talk about what's wrong with putting people in office, it's also, you have to look at who's supporting our candidates. Why is it that we can get an unusual amount of money from private interest groups? Why aren't we all interested in doing right by the voter and doing the right thing for the constituent? That's the promise I make when I'm here for the voters. Thank you.
Next question being asked by Garrett.
Harwich Stan testified last term in favor of a bill to require genocide education in our state's high schools. Would you be willing to sponsor and/or support the reintroduction of that bill in the coming term?
Let me give you a little more background. We supported it. It's a bill that was pending called an Act relative to genocide education. It's a bill that would require the high schools to teach genocide and genocide prevention as part of its curriculum, teach multiple genocides as a part of the core curriculum in high school education. We testified in favor of that bill a year ago before the Education Committee. That bill died in the Ways and Means Committee after getting out of the Education Committee this year. And so the question is, would you be willing to support that bill, perhaps possibly co-sponsor it in the upcoming term? We'll start with you, Mr. Crocker.
My mother told me to do your homework before you come out. I've done no homework on this issue, so I'm not prepared to discuss the issue. But I will be comfortable to sit down with anybody who wants to discuss the issue with me, bring me up to speed, if I'm so lucky as to win the election. Thank you.
Mr. Wolf.
Yeah, I love the fact that you at a high school level are so engaged that you're actually sending those proposals up. And I am actually familiar with the genocide proposal because I went to the Darfur rally that took place at the Green in Hyannis last month. Yes, I would absolutely co-sponsor that bill. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it requires 3 genocides to be
I
tried.
can't remember.
So yes, I support it. I think it's great. As a Jewish American, certainly, who had relatives or distant relatives that were in Europe during the Holocaust, I think it's absolutely essential. Those who do not learn from history are destined to repeat it, I think is a very apt statement as far as this is concerned. By the way, while I'm applauding the activism of you all, I also want to point out that I think it came from Harwich, the divestiture, both for Darfur and for Iran. Is that true?
We helped testify in favor of that, but there were many groups supporting that, not just us.
Yeah, when you can go up to Beacon Hill and actually make a difference like that, I think it's a sign of empowerment for you all. So I would encourage you to stay engaged, and yes, I would be a co-sponsor of that bill.
Okay. Ryan will ask the next question.
Should the state more strictly regulate the use of herbicides by companies like MSTAR?
Ryan, why don't you repeat that a little more slowly?
Sorry. Should the state more strictly regulate the use of herbicides by companies like MSTAR?
Yeah, Mr. Wolf.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is always yes. I mean, I think if you had to say what is the problem right now with our economy and in the United States, it's way too much corporate control in government. So I think we need to be very engaged in making sure that the environmental protection through those types of regulations are in place and continually being assessed, evaluated, and improved on. I will say I've come out and I'm very opposed to MSTAR's current plan to use herbicides under the power lines. I think there are so many more creative and better ways we could treat the land that we get our drinking water from than to spray poison on them or allow corporations to spray poison on them. So we should continually be looking at the regulations, and yes, to the degree that we can continue to tighten them and improve them for environmental protection, we should do that.
Mr. Crocker.
I've served 15 years at COMM Fire and Water, and I've been involved with protecting the aquifer for all those years. There's a very lengthy testing process that goes through the DEP process for turning in your sheets on the true water that you then pump into your system to supply public well water. And there is no question that we have to protect everything that's sprayed, and matter of fact, we know it is a licensed application. But anytime we can tighten it, and anytime we find any degree in our drinking water, we have to sound the bell at the loudest level.